Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Beauty History. I am your host, Allison Chase. Beauty History is where we take a deep dive into the life, legacy, and history of a fashion or beauty icon. And today we are taking a deep dive into the Hermes family and the Hermes luxury house. But before we go any further, let's take a second to grab our iced coffee or a hot coffee. Let's take a sip and let's get started. Hi, it's me from the future. There is a new episode of Beauty History the first Friday of every month. Make sure that you are subscribed and also make sure you hit the notification bell so you can be notified whenever I post a new Beauty History episode. Now, Hermes is a French luxury brand that specializes in leather goods, perfumes, and accessories, not to be confused with the Greek god Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods. So today we will talk about several generations of Hermes, but we have to start from the very beginning. So in 1801, Thierry Hermès was born. He was born in Krefeld, Germany, and his father was French, but his mother was German. Now, at the time, Krefeld, Germany was actually part of Napoleon's empire, so through birth, he was given French citizenship. He was the youngest of 6 children, and his parents were innkeepers. Now, Krefeld had, or still has, the nickname of the city of velvet because the city of velvet and silk, because it had a very strong history in the textile world. Now, unfortunately, due to war and famine, Thierry lost his entire family. Both of his parents and all of his siblings died. And so in 1821, he moved to Paris as an orphan. Now, Thierry was gifted in leatherworking. I'm not exactly certain when or where he learned this craft. Some parts of history are, remain in history and are hard to discover. But in 1829, he met and married Christine Petronille Pierton, and the two had only one child. They had a son named Charles Émile. Now, in 1837, Thierry opened up his shop, and this is where Hermes began, the first boutique, the first store. And I know that we think of Hermes now as like uber luxury bags and handbags and accessories, but they were first and foremost a shop and a boutique specializing in harnesses and saddles, because at the time, the only way to get around was either by horseback or by a horse-drawn carriage. And so since everyone needed a saddle, a harness, accessories relating to equestrian, that's what they did. But even though everyone got around by horse at the time, Thierry knew that he wanted a richer clientele, because just because everyone went around by horse didn't mean that he wanted just anyone as his client. And so he started off from the get-go as a luxury brand. So in order to set himself apart, everyone wants to be luxury, who doesn't? But you actually have to, do something special in order to merit that luxury clientele and that luxury pricing. And so from the very beginning, Thierry focused a lot on his technique and his craftsmanship, like not just making something look nice, but the quality behind it. And he did something called the saddle stitch. So all of his pieces of leather used this technique called the saddle stitch. So what this is if you imagine a piece of leather, you pierce a hole through it, and then on one side with a needle and thread, you go through the hole, and then on the other side, you have a second needle and thread, and you go through the same hole, and then you pull the needle and threads on opposite sides, and that is called a saddle stitch. And this is very meticulous. It has to be done by hand. It's very time consuming. but it reinforces the leather. It adds, not only is it a special touch because it's done by hand, but also it reinforces the stitch itself. It's stronger because you literally have 2 needles and thread going through. And I actually have a video clip provided here by JH Leather. This is a channel that talks about leather and just making a fabric by hand, and they actually have a video here showing how to do the saddle stitch on a piece of leather. So Thierry was known for his high, impeccable level of craftsmanship, of technical achievements, because like I said, we think of Hermes, we just think of like uber luxury, very fancy, which it was, but it did not become the brand it is today just because it was fancy. Like, he literally won awards for his technical achievements. It was at the Paris World's Fair in 1855 and then 1867 that he was recognized on a world stage for his technical achievements and his just incredible workmanship. Thierry had clients who were part of the nobility. His clients included Napoleon III, his wife Empress Eugenie. So his plans on, making harnesses and saddles for the rich worked out very nicely. Now, Thierry passed away in 1878, and that's when his son Charles-Émile took over. Now, the first order of business for Charles-Émile was to move the location of the flagship store. He moved it to 24 Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Now, this is currently still the location of the flagship store. It has not moved since the 1880s, so that's quite impressive. Here, Charles-Émile started focusing a lot on saddles as well, like still harnesses, but also more saddles. And still, this was only a company for equestrian riding and for suiting up horse-drawn carriages. No bags yet. And here he was focusing on making custom and bespoke pieces just to add that extra level of luxury. Charles-Émile was adding clients who were part of the elites in Europe, in North Africa, parts of Asia, and also the Americas as well. Now, we would see the first bag, but not a handbag yet, in 1900. And this bag was called Oat Aqua. Now, this was not a handbag. It was a bag that was made for equestrian riding. So this bag was very tall, and it's called Oat Aqua, which translates, like, haute means tall and courroie means like straps or belts, so like high straps, I guess you could translate it to. And you can still currently purchase this bag, but it was designed to carry riding boots and saddles. So if you were part of high society, you would go horseback riding for the afternoon, and then you had muddy boots and you wanted to change, and so you would take your muddy boots and shove them into this bag. You can still purchase it today, but it's like a very spacious bag. So imagine if it has enough room for a whole saddle and riding boots. It's around this time that the automobile came into play. I don't remember when the first automobile came out, the Model T Ford. I don't remember the date exactly, but obviously because Hermes clients were only the super rich, and when automobiles came out, it was only for the super rich. Clearly, some of their clients started using cars or automobiles, so they gave this bag, the Oat Aqua, sort of a makeover, and they marketed this bag as a perfect travel bag because it was so large, but it was just like open. There was no real compartments in it, but they just marketed the bag as, if you're just a high society living in London or Paris and you're going off into the French countryside for the weekend, you can stuff your Oat Aqua and put it in your Model T Ford or whatever car you're driving. Now, Charles-Émile had 2 sons. He had Adolphe and Émile Maurice. And Charles-Émile retired and his 2 sons took over. But since it was 2 people, they actually briefly renamed the company to Frères Hermès, which translates to Hermès brothers. We see this all the time with companies when it says like Hermès and Sons or brothers, that sort of thing. And by 1914, the 2 brothers had employed over 80 craftsmen to work on the saddles alone, like just the saddles. There were 80 men in the Paris workshop just doing that. So that's quite impressive. But something happened around this time. So by this time, there was the First World War, and we started seeing the automobile become more popular. Again, only with the super rich. Like there were automobiles used in the military for the First World War. Did I say first or second? I mean the First World War, obviously. But automobiles became important and just more commonplace. Again, commonplace for the super rich, which was who their clientele was. Now, because this was a company solely producing harnesses, saddles, the occasional bag for your riding boots, the brother Adolphe thought to himself, clearly this company is a sinking ship. He was convinced that in a decade they would be bankrupt and there would be no money, and so he actually left the company. He was like, you know what, sinking ship, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know what he did. I couldn't find anything else, but he left the company. And so his brother was left in charge, Émile Maurice. He's the one who continued the company. So where his brother just saw like doom and gloom, I think Émile Maurice saw opportunity, because obviously their clients were purchasing vehicles and driving off to the French countryside instead of going by horse-drawn carriage. He also knew, like, hey, we use leather. We make leather goods. Clearly, these automobiles need leather interiors. They need leather accessories, and the Oat Aqua is successful as a travel bag. So he knew, I don't know, he had faith in the company, basically. Now, around this time, Émile Maurice went on a trip to Canada. Hi, hello. And he saw a military vehicle. And this military vehicle had canvas, and in the center of the canvas he saw this like intricate, mesmerizing metal contraption. I don't know how else to describe it. This was in fact the zipper. You know, the zipper on your jeans, on your purse, on your wallet, on half of the items in your house. It was the metal zipper. You know, everything that we take for granted at some point in time was brand new and revolutionary. And so he saw this just by chance on a military vehicle in Canada, and he jumped on it. So he actually got the rights, and he was able to get a patent on the zipper for 2 whole years. And he got busy, and he put that on everything. He, at that point in time, I don't know if it was called the zipper. They called it the fastener, and it was called the Hermes fastener because for 2 years he had the patent on it. And so he put that on everything. On everything that Hermes was making and selling, it had the Hermes fastener. Like, he did not call it the Hermes fastener. The public did, because he was the first person in France to sell an item with a fastener. So they just called it the Hermes fastener. So any item that they could come up with that would have a need for opening and closing, it got one. It got an Hermes fastener. In 1918, Hermes came out with the very first leather golf jacket with a zipper with the Hermes fastener. And they actually presented this to Edward, Prince of Wales, who would later go on to become Edward VIII, who abdicated his throne to marry Wallis Simpson, and the two would go on to have a very problematic honeymoon. Émile Maurice summarized his philosophy when it came to Hermes as leather, sport, and a tradition of refined elegance, which I think is still very accurate when you think of Hermes as a brand. And the Hermes Workshop was known as the place for technical achievements, for ingenuity. I mean, they had the saddle stitch, they had the zipper. Imagine if a workplace now had like an AI robot doing the work. People would go to see this, okay? And so at the time, Coco Chanel actually visited the workshop because she also wanted to know about this creative technical achievement that they were doing and just the ingenuity and the level of craftsmanship. So she actually spent time in their workshop, just learning from the craftsmen there. So in 1922, this is when Hermes first came out with their first real actual handbag that wasn't just a bag to shove your dirty riding boots in. So in 1922, Charles Emile was married, and his wife was telling him that she just couldn't really find a bag that she loved, and she couldn't just find a bag that she needed. And Charles Emile was talking to his good friend Ettore Bugatti, you know, of Bugatti, the car industry enterprise. Yes, they were friends, of course. And they were just talking and brainstorming. And Charles Emile actually produced a bag for his wife, of course, with the Hermes zipper on the front. You know, Charles Emile really loved his company, and he loved the company that his family had started. And he took a lot of pride in his work. And he was always looking for newer and better ways to advance the company. You know, he had created the Hermes fastener, the first leather golf jacket with a fastener, but he was always looking for more, and he focused on other things because he didn't want his clients to have to shop elsewhere to complete a look. He wanted his clients to have a head-to-toe Hermes look, and so he focused on jewelry, on watches, on sandals. So theoretically, you could just have a head-to-toe Hermes look. So in the 1920s, Hermes opened 2 locations outside of Paris, still in France, and they opened these at some resort towns in the south, you know, where people go to be very chic and elegant. And Émile Maurice had 4 daughters, one of whom died in early life, which is unfortunate. But what's interesting is he had 4 daughters who all went on to marry, but none of his daughters actually took over the company. It was all their husbands or his son-in-laws that took over the brand. In the 1930s, we saw 2 of the most iconic pieces for Hermes and 2 of the most iconic pieces in fashion history. We saw the Kelly bag and the silk scarf. So, what is the Kelly bag? So the Kelly bag actually came out in the 1930s, in 1935. And this was called the sac à dépêche, which translates to like the quick bag, the hurry bag. So a bag for when you're on the go. And this was a very spacious travel bag. It was marketed for women who were traveling and who needed lots of space in a bag. What's important to note is that most women's handbags at the time were completely different from the sac à dépêche. At the time, women's bags tended to be clutches. So if you think of an envelope, like a square or a rectangle and flat, it was like an envelope, like a clutch bag that you would just hold in your hand. That was the style and the trend. And the sac à dépêche was completely opposite. It was a very large and spacious bag. So it was very different. But why is it called the Kelly bag? Okay, so in the 1950s, I think in 1950, there was a filmmaker named Alfred Hitchcock, and he was working on a film called To Catch a Thief, and there was an actress named Grace Kelly. She was in the film. Hitchcock had his costume designer, Edith Head, and she purchased some Hermes accessories for the film. One of these accessories was the sac à dépêche. Now, legend has it that Grace Kelly loved this bag. She fell in love with the bag on set. I don't know if she kept the original bag from the set piece or if she went out and bought her own. But either way, she got her hands on an Hermes sac à dépêche. Now, Grace Kelly, after her films, she actually got married, and she didn't just marry anyone. She married the Prince of Monaco. And so she became the Princess of Monaco. And when I tell you that people loved this, people ate this up, okay? An American princess, an American glamorous Hollywood actress marries a European prince. I mean, I think the Hallmark movie channel is based off of this entire fairy tale story. People could not get enough of her specifically. They couldn't get enough of them, of their wedding, of the glamour, of the chicness, all of it. They loved them, but they loved her specifically. And we've seen what the media is like, we've seen what paparazzi is like, and the paparazzi were hounding her constantly. Everywhere she went, anytime she walked out of a car, walked out of a restaurant, anytime she left a boutique, the paparazzi was harassing her. So there were constantly newspaper and magazine articles and photos of her minding her own business at all times. And after she got married, she became pregnant, but she did not want paparazzi taking photos of her growing stomach and making comments and etc., etc. And so she had her sac à dépêche that she would hold in front of her body, in front of her stomach, as she would exit a vehicle, exit a shop. She was using it to sort of camouflage or just to shield herself from the flashing paparazzi photos. And a lot of the photos that were published about her and articles about her were her holding this Hermes bag. And so it was nicknamed the Kelly bag. But in 1977, it was officially renamed the Kelly bag. Now, if you're interested in purchasing a Kelly bag, they start as low as $7,500 US and go up to $50,000 US depending on the size and leather. Then in 1937, the silk scarf came out. It was born, the fabulous silk scarf. The first one was called Jeux des Omnibus et Dames Blanches. This was the first in a long series of silk scarves, and this was created by Robert Dumas. He was one of the son-in-laws of Émile Maurice, and Robert Dumas was involved not only in the silk scarf, but also the Kelly bag. So even though he wasn't, he was related through family to Hermes. He wasn't like a blood relation. Robert Dumas was very, very important for the Hermes brand. And in French, a silk scarf is called un carré, which means, like, it literally translates to a square. And I like un carré a bit better than silk scarf. It just sounds a bit more chic and elegant. But the silk scarf became quintessential, not only for Hermes, but just for high fashion, glamour. Obviously, people like Grace Kelly wore the silk scarf un carré, and they all, like, people like Elizabeth Taylor, Sophia Loren, Marilyn Monroe, just like the most elegant, chic women you could think of, wore a silk scarf and still do to this day. Now, we are entering the Second World War. So at the time, Paris was occupied by Nazis, and this affected everyone. So clearly there were rations on food, coffee, sugar, flour, things like that, but also materials and fabrics. So types of leather, dyes, paint, things like that. Now, up until that point, Hermes, when you would purchase something, you would get it in a box made out of pigskin, but that sort of became harder to come around because of the war and the rations and everything like that. And so one thing they had a lot of was paper. They had a lot of paper, and for some reason, there was a lot of orange dye. For some reason, no one wanted the color orange. There was a lot of orange dye, orange paint, and lots of paper. So they used the paper to make cardboard boxes, and they used the orange dye to dye those boxes orange. And that's where we came up with the Hermes orange box, the Hermes orange color. It was made out of necessity. It wasn't like a family color. It wasn't a family crest. It was literally what was around and what was in abundance during the Second World War. For those of you wondering, there is a Pantone color for Hermes. It is number 1448. And anytime I do a beauty history episode on a person or a brand and it spans over the Second World War, I always do a deep dive just in case. And Hermes came out clean. Good for you. Unlike Coco. You can look that one up. I have a whole episode on Coco and her. It's not even collaboration, you know. It wasn't even a collaboration. But anyway, I diverge. So the Hermes box. There are 188 different sizes. I have a tiny one here. This is just for a lipstick right here. This is just a little box for the lipstick, but there are 188 and different sizes, and the largest Hermes box actually holds up to 40 Birkin bags. That's a really big box. In 1949, Hermes capitalized on something, the men's necktie. So as I stated earlier, they had some boutiques open at some resort towns in France, and one of them was in Cannes. And Cannes has a lot of casinos. So a lot of gentlemen would go into the casinos and they would realize that these very luxurious casinos have dress codes, and so they would be turned away. And they would go to Hermes, which was next door to the casino, and ask like, can I just buy any tie whatsoever? And so Hermes was like, okay, we need to start manufacturing silk men's neckties. And that's how the silk men's necktie happened for Hermes, because they weren't really making them up until all of this spillover from the casinos came into their stores in Cannes. Also in 49, that is when the first fragrance from Hermes came out. This is Eau d'Hermès, which is technically a unisex fragrance, but on me is a bit masculine. It has notes of lavender, cinnamon, and leather. I think it's the leather note that on me turns a bit masculine, but you know, technically any fragrance is for anyone. If you like it, please wear it. In 61, that is when they came out with their first like official feminine fragrance. This one is called Calèche, and this one has notes of bergamot, sandalwood, and iris. But again, if you're a man and you like Calèche, wear it. So in 1951, Robert Dumas took over, and I have to read something directly from the Hermes website right here for you. And this refers to Émile Maurice and why one of his son-in-laws took over. And it says, as the father of 4 daughters, Émile Hermès passed the torch to his sons-in-law. I guess it was the 1950s, and I guess at that point, women probably couldn't even own a bank account in their own name. So it makes sense that like the women, like his own daughters, would not have taken over. But it's just like, it's still annoying. But yeah, I think at that point, could you even own a bank account in your own name? Did it have to be like in your father's name or like in your husband's name? So I suppose it makes sense that the girls, the daughters themselves wouldn't inherit the company, but their husbands still. Anyway, but Robert Dumas was really great for the brand. I'm not knocking him. And he actually took his wife's name, like his name was Robert Dumas, but he hyphenated his last name to Robert Dumas Hermès. So that's progressive sort of. And he was responsible for the Kelly bag and the silk scarf. So like, I'm not knocking him, I'm just knocking sexism in general. But he was also responsible for the Chaîne d'Ancre bracelet. He was inspired by his time in Normandy and seeing the boats docked at the harbor. And if you look at this bracelet, it literally looks like little anchors. It's actually a really cute bracelet. I think it's really lovely. And Robert was the first person to take over the company who was not a blood relation. He was related only through family, so he was the first person to do that. And what's interesting is that the company was founded in 1837, but it wasn't until the 1950s that they came out with their official logo. So when you think of Hermes, you think of orange, you think of orange boxes, and you think of their logo, but it only came out in the 50s. It's said to be inspired by French painter Alfred de Dreux, and he has a painting called Hitched Carriage Waiting Groom. And if you look at the painting and if you look at an Hermes logo, clearly there is some heavy inspiration here, which makes sense because this was clearly an ode and homage to the origin and roots of the brand. Because again, this started off first and foremost as a brand for harnesses and saddles. This was not a perfume and handbag company originally. It literally was there for equestrian riders. But in the 60s, they used Leila Mancheri and Annie Baumel, and they worked as a creative powerhouse for the window displays of Hermes. So when you think of like a beautiful window display, it's very nice, it's inviting, it's a great marketing technique, but they created these like over-the-top, elaborate, very flamboyant, almost like mini pieces of theater. And this was specifically at the Paris workshop, or at the flagship location, just to draw people in just to have a look. In 1967, that is when the first women's ready-to-wear collection launched. And what's interesting is that this company was doing really well and had lots of success. I mean, the Kelly bag, the scarf, etc. But in the 70s, they did see a pretty significant dip. I mean, everything that's new becomes old, everything that's old becomes new. Everything sort of has those like ebbs and flows, so it does make sense. There is some speculation that perhaps at the time in the 70s, there was a push for like more synthetic, like maybe using like polyester and just different types of material that Hermes was not using. They were using leather and natural sources like that. So that could be part of the dip, but in the 70s, they were really saved by their perfume line and also their scarves, because there was actually a 2-week period where the workroom in Paris went silent. All the workmen were there with their needles waiting to do a saddle stitch, and there were no orders for 2 whole weeks. In 1979, there was an ad campaign by Hermes, and it featured a young model, and she was wearing an Hermes scarf while wearing denim. And for some reason, I don't want to say it was controversial, but it was very maybe shocking or avant-garde, because for some reason at the time, people just didn't think you'd wear a silk scarf and denim. Like if you wore a silk scarf, you were wearing a nice suit or a dress, something very chic. You weren't just a young woman wearing a denim jacket with a silk scarf. I mean, nowadays people wear that, but that campaign was very, very popular, and it helped reach a whole new demographic and audience that wanted to have that sort of like chic mixture of a silk scarf, but still look young and not their mother's fashion house. So in 1978, Robert retired and his son Jean-Louis took over. Jean-Louis was eccentric, maybe eclectic is the right word. He was very hippy-dippy, bohemian. Before taking over the company in his youth, he had done a road trip through Nepal, through Afghanistan, through Iran. He was part of a jazz ensemble that toured through Scandinavia and Czechoslovakia. He was just a very cultured man. He liked art, he liked different cultures, and he brought a lot of that flair and flavor to the brand. The first thing he did was he expanded the flagship location. So he purchased the building next door to the flagship in Paris and just expanded it. Now, in the early 1980s, Jean-Louis was on a flight from Paris to London, and he was sitting next to a young English actress named Jane Birkin. Now, Jane had this large straw bag with her, and she had a bunch of things sort of coming out of it, and she placed it in the overhead compartment, and something happened. On the flight, she opened up the compartment, and her bag and the contents of the bag just flew all over the plane. Like her bag just exploded, everything went everywhere, and she was running to collect everything and put them back in her straw bag. And he was looking at her like, what are you doing? What's going on? And she was telling him like, listen, I cannot find a bag big enough for everything that I need. Like I can't find anything big enough for everything that I need for my whole day. And so she was sitting next to him and she started doodling on one of those little square napkins. Like I wish I had a bag that could look like this and was big enough for that. And he suggested that the bag should have pockets, like for different compartments. And she essentially wanted something like the Kelly bag, but bigger and with more pockets and more space. And so in 1984, Jean-Louis came out with the Birkin bag. Yes, the Birkin bag. Now, this one retails at around 10,000 US up to 500,000 US. And there probably are some pieces that are more expensive depending on the type of material used. Now, if you have that kind of money cash, like literally if you just have a stack of hundreds in your hand right now, and you walk to an Hermes store and ask for a Birkin bag, they will tell you no. There is a waiting list. It can last several years. And I've been told, I wouldn't know this personally because that's not the type of bag that I purchased, but I've been told that even if you had I don't know, $50,000 cash on you right now and you asked for a Birkin bag, they would tell you no. Because Hermes is the type of brand, allegedly, that likes you to work up to a Birkin bag. So you're going to have to buy some scarves, you're going to have to buy some bracelets and some sandals and some Kelly bags before you can work up to a Birkin bag. So I've been told. In the 1980s, the company also started to do tableware. So if you want to have a very luxurious dinner party, you can go ahead and buy silverware and plates and just whole dining sets that are Hermes. That sounds actually quite nice. This includes porcelain and crystal, and I'm sure it would be very luxurious. In 1993, the company went public. They sold on the Paris Stock Exchange, but the company retained 80% of the stocks. So the company is still within the family. The family still runs the company, and selling the company put Jean-Louis and the entire family on the Forbes list of billionaires. Personally, if I had that kind of money, I would not want to be on any magazine or any list. No, thank you. And I wonder if the descendants of Adolphe, who decided to leave the company, I wonder if they got any money. I don't know. And in the early 90s, Jean-Louis decided to move the workshop. So if you go to the flagship store in Paris, it's still there, but they moved the workshop to Pantin, which is just outside of Paris. It's just like, it's bigger, it's more spacious, there's more light. So the workshop is still in France, but just outside, which makes sense. And then in 97, Jean-Louis hired Belgian designer Martin Margiela to design the women's ready-to-wear collection. But then in 1999, Jean-Louis purchased 35% of the Jean-Paul Gaultier brand, which at the time was very surprising. I'm not sure why, but it made sense because in 2003, Margiela left Hermes and then Jean-Paul Gaultier came over as creative director. In 2000, Hermes opened their first Maison Hermes in New York. This is on Madison Avenue, and Jean-Paul also helped open stores in Japan, South Korea, and also their online store, of course. After 28 years with the brand, Jean-Louis retired in early 2000s. He had, unfortunately, a very long struggle with illness, and he passed away in 2010. I'm not sure what he passed away from, but I just know that he was ill for a very long time, which is unfortunate. At the time, Patrick Thomas took over, and he was not related to anyone. He was not married to anyone. He was not an Hermes whatsoever. This was the first time that there was someone leading the company who had no affiliation with the family. He had joined the brand in 1989, so he had been with the company for a very, very long time. And when Jean-Louis retired, when he became too sick to work in the early 2000s, Patrick Thomas took over. But then in 2013, Axel Dumas, who is the nephew of Jean-Louis, took over. So currently, the Hermes company is still within the family, and Axel Dumas is the one who is leading the charge. Interesting, in 2018, Hermes opened up their largest store in Dubai. This location has multiple stories, and I believe this is still currently their largest store. It makes sense that it would be in Dubai. It would, wouldn't it? And then, very importantly, in 2020, Hermes came out with their beauty collection, their beauty launch. This started off with their lipsticks, the Rouge Hermes, and then they started doing the lipstick brushes, and then they did blushes, and then they did blush brushes, and then they've done tinted lip balms. They've done nail polishes too. I have still yet to purchase the nail polishes. I want to go in store and just enjoy myself and see the colors in person, but I really appreciate that their beauty launch has been slow and steady. I don't like to see a new brand come out with 500 new things. Show me that this is like meticulous and that you are reading the room and seeing what sells. I like it to be slow and steady. I like that they have gradually started to add more and more. I really appreciate that. And I don't know what's going to come next this year. I would guess maybe a mascara or bronzer or eyeshadow, because they have lipstick, they have blush, they have highlighters, they have nail polish. So they're doing color. Maybe it's eyeshadow next. I don't know. Or maybe a foundation. Time will tell. I am here for it. I really like this brand. I like the makeup. I'm not buying a Birkin bag, thank you. But I think that their beauty collection really matches the brand. It matches the high standard and aesthetic of the brand. Is it expensive? It's Hermes. Of course, it's expensive. But I like the makeup. The makeup that I have tried, I've enjoyed. So yeah, that is the story of Hermes and the several generations that have come from this company. I have to say that the family that I covered before was the Gucci family, and it seems as though the Hermes family is maybe more well-adjusted, perhaps has gone to therapy more so than the Guccis. The Guccis definitely were a bit more turbulent. I don't want to say violent, but apparently some of them were violent to each other. I read somewhere afterwards that there were some meetings that the Guccis went to, like I think the great-grandsons, while they were infighting, and they literally got into like punching, fisting arguments during a board meeting. I have not read anything regarding the Hermes family regarding this, so I'm glad that the Hermes family is a bit more well-adjusted and seems to have adapted better to their tremendous wealth and legacy. But this is Hermes. This is how it began. An orphan started making harnesses and saddles in Paris, and now his great-great-great-grandchildren are all billionaires. So, good for him. This is Beauty History. I have a new episode the first Friday of every single month. I talk about a new icon or a fashion house in the beauty or fashion world. So I hope you take the time to subscribe. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the Hermes family. Let me know who you think I should cover next. And I think this is all I have for you guys for today. So thank you all so much for stopping by. Hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.